Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Europass Teacher Talk. My name is Susan Gagliano, and I am a teacher trainer at the Europass Teacher Academy in Florence, Italy, where I come to you live. And every other Tuesday, I come to you either with a live program where we do a deep dive together into a topic that is important to our community, or where I speak with a guest that is often part of the Europass network who comes with their expertise to give us lots of practical strategies and tips on things that are really important to us right now in education in 2025. And I'd like to thank you for being here. And when you have a second, just hit that subscribe button and please feel free to like, comment, or share this content, as this will help our algorithm in reaching more and more people in the education community. And today, I would like to talk about something that teachers bring up a lot in our courses, and it's something that they talk about with a bit of concern. And it's about how well or how poorly their students seem to be able to think critically. So, critical thinking is definitely something that I'm not so sure we really learn how to teach it in the classroom. Or perhaps we're using some of the same tools and methods that our teachers used, but we have a lot of competition nowadays for our students' attention. So, as you are all logging on, I see that some friends are joining us, and please let us know where you are joining us from. And let's see if we have a good representation from all different countries, because one of the wonderful things about the Europass community is the fact that we have so many people coming from different places. So just shout out, let us know if you're here. And while we are waiting for people to log on, I would like to ask you something that I find, like I said, that our teachers have some different points of view in this. So my first question, and please answer in the comments, is: have students today lost much of their ability to think critically, in your experience, in your opinion? Have students lost their ability to think critically? Yes or no? Let me know. If it's a yes, tell me why you think that. Yes, because. And if you don't think it's true, if you say no, my students have great ability for critical thinking. So tell us, what makes you say that? What has been your experience? All right, let's see. As people are answering this, yes. Sophia says yes, even adults. And what makes you say that, Sophia? What is it that you are noticing? And does anyone have a different opinion? Has anyone had a different experience? What we seem to, what we all agree on is the fact that our students have, let's say they have access to a quantity of information, or let's say content, because it's information, but information can also sometimes be confused with facts. So they have access to a lot of content. And when we were younger, of course, we had access to information, to knowledge, to skills, usually directly through our teachers, and also through our textbooks. Perhaps we saw some film strips, we saw some documentaries, but we really needed to be in school in order to learn about these different subjects. And nowadays, actually, it's quite different. And so thank you, Sophia, for answering. And anyone else who has some thoughts on that, just let us know. So here, let's see here, if when I'm thinking about this concept of critical thinking, it's I was thinking of it in terms of thinking about information, but also thoughts, our own thoughts, our feelings, and how our feelings will affect our thinking, and how our thinking will affect our feelings, and also the motivation that would be perhaps behind uh, mm, some of the content that we are exposed to. So today we'll talk a bit about things that have to do with, of course, the use of the internet, of social media, but we're also going to talk about just good practices to have in the classroom, and we'll sprinkle in some activities to do together. So when we think about critical thinking, um, the idea is that it's this ability to think in an organized and a rational manner in order to understand connections between ideas and emotions and facts. How does that sound to you? This idea of metacognition, which in very simple terms is thinking about our thinking, reflecting on how we got to a certain conclusion, and also thinking about other people's thinking. So, this metacognition helps us to identify and analyze, evaluate, and make choices thoughtfully. And it is something that really slows down what is so, I would say, satisfying about critical thinking is that we have to kind of slow down that part of our brain that makes quick judgments, or the part of our brain that is that accepts information that is partial or that is distorted. It's something that is the human brain tends to do this quite easily, and so actually critical thinking is asking us to do something that's a little bit more tiring for the brain, but ultimately much more satisfying. So I thought this was a great quote. It is a fundamental 21st century skill. And as William James said, a great many people think they are thinking when they are merely rearranging their prejudices. Now, what could he have meant by that? Rearranging their prejudices. So, prejudice, which is a prejudgment. So, it's a judgment that we've made before we even have really thought it through, or we are just applying old information to perhaps something new that's come up, and we've already made up our minds. So, what is it that makes these critical thinking skills so incredibly important in this moment we're living? That thinking critically, when we do this, we are constantly challenging what we assume to be right, to be correct, to be appropriate, and to be the truth. And it certainly can help us with to act with a certain intentionality. So we would not simply just imitate, regurgitate. Okay. I think this is something that, to a certain point, of course, we would like for our students to absorb certain notions and knowledge and be able to also produce them, either written in a written form or verbally. However, it's also important to encourage them to think about what it is that we are actually offering them. And we'll see some really cool examples of how to do that. The most important thing, though, is that we are giving them tools in order to be much more involved and informed citizens, voters, um, family members, neighbors. And in looking around at at world events at this moment, it's undoubtedly something that can only help us in coexisting together. And so, just in case we don't remember, This is this idea of like something that can be really motivational for the students is the fact that when they use their critically thinking brain, they feel smarter. They actually feel some of that cognitive fatigue, but the satisfaction of coming up with their own thoughts. And so here, something that can give us some courage. It's not just some boring exercise. It's this idea that the process of questioning sources or raising their hand and saying, yes, but, and not feeling like it's something that we need to take personally. It promotes a healthy skepticism, and it challenges some assumptions, and they are seeking a solid basis on which to judge to make their judgments and to form their opinions. And so it raises further questions, and it does all of that great stuff that we see in Bloom's taxonomy, like synthesizing, evaluating, comparing. Here, just so we have a bit of a review of Bloom's taxonomy. Maybe it's been a while since you've seen this. And here it's a taxonomy that while it's not a perfect taxonomy, it gives us a lot of great input as to how we can think about our lessons. And in Bloom's taxonomy, he is suggesting a kind of a hierarchy. Now, what we know now is that perhaps it's not so much a hierarchy. Perhaps these things actually are not sequential, but they can coexist. Or sometimes we might even start with something creative and work backwards. It's not just a question of let's start with first retaining and recalling. In any case, these are all some of the higher ordered thinking that we are trying to promote in our classrooms, like remembering, okay, just memorizing. There are certain aspects when we talk about learning the irregular past tense verbs in English or the past participles. Lots of times there is no other way to learn that the verb goes buy, bought, bought, or catch, caught, caught. If there's no other way, lots of times, except for memorizing and repeating it and finding lots of ways to keep, doing activities that will help us remember it and recall it. Then we talk about understanding, grasping the meaning of something. So when we're grasping the meaning, that's when we're going to try to produce it on some level, where we're going to try to repeat it back, or we would write a summary of it. And that gets us, that's a more active part of showing what we have learned. And then, of course, applying it. So taking that knowledge a bit out of context and somehow being able to practice it or show that, okay, we're no longer just using these examples that the teacher's given us, but we can apply it, analyzing it, seeing the different relationships, the cause and effect, the connections, organizing, distinguishing, and evaluating. So this is where we really need very sound critical thinking skills in making judgments based on a very sound analysis, and that we're able to defend, that we are able to critique, and creating. Because creativity and critical thinking are they are like conjoined twins, okay? They are connected to each other. What I often say in my courses with the teachers is that creativity and critical thinking go hand in hand. However, they usually need to be, let's say, sometimes we don't need them in the same room together at the same time, especially when we are working on our creative process. Because when we're trying to produce different ideas in a creative way, sometimes the critical thinking brain comes in, and instead of enhancing our ideas in the first moment, sometimes the critical thinking brain comes in and starts telling us, no, that will never work. No, that's not a good idea. And actually you're really emphasizing the critical part of this phrase, and it can actually kind of kill our creativity. However, when we allow ourselves to kind of to create different ideas, to produce, to let our minds kind of go free, our minds or our hands, in the case that we're producing something manually, artistically. And then we bring in the critical thinker to evaluate what we have created. That is the perfect combination. And he talks about creating in terms of like using this existing information to make something new. So this is something that is present in our classrooms all the time. But once again, there are some teachers that might emphasize more or one of these aspects. And it could be really interesting in how you think critically about your classroom is thinking, well, what would I like to start with to stimulate this conversation, that a critical conversation? And does it need to necessarily start with them remembering and understanding? So something that a lot of us are concerned about has to do with cognitive bias. Cognitive bias, which is it's like it's called a cerebral shortcut. A shortcut is when we find a really fast way home, okay? And we might take the back roads and we try to get somewhere as fast as we can. And our brains are always looking for ways to do things in what it is deemed to be more efficient. The problem is, though, in this desire for speed and efficiency, we sometimes jump over some of our thinking, and we tend to put things in boxes very quickly. And it's actually part of our physiology. This is not necessarily something, I mean, this is a bit how we're made. We look for things to make our decision making easier. And we are living in a moment where attention is definitely, attention is a problem right now. There is, apart from the greater diagnosis of attention deficit disorders, but actual attention problems because of the fact that we're subjected to so much information, and it's hard for us to actually put in the effort to think something through. So we might need these mental shortcuts, and it wants to speed up our ability to make these judgments. And so it's super fun to think about how we can play with this in the classroom. This is just like a silly example in this slide where we're looking at like different headlines, or these maybe are from different Instagram accounts, where these three different images here are talking about all about nutrition, which is a topic that is where there's a lot of bombardment of information. It seems like everyone has the, what's the best thing to do, and every 6 months it seems like it's shifting and changing, and it's very confusing for people. And the kinds of language that's used often stimulates emotions in people that are watching it. Like, for example, the dangers of seed oils, okay? Or the difference between real food and fake food. Okay, I mean, who doesn't want to eat real food, right? Or studies suggest that the keto diet enhances cancer drug effectiveness in mice. Now, this is surely based on an aspect of truth, okay? But it's also interesting to think, who could be behind this study? And what motivations might they have? Or low carb diet linked to early death. I mean, what a way to get people nervous. So I'd like to do something with you, for those of you who are watching. Just let's have some fun with tourism. All right. If we think about tourism, so it's no big secret. Oh, hello. I see Lenea and Pete. No, Panos. Okay. Welcome. And I would like to ask you to think about the topic of tourism. We all have seen, and I don't need to even cite any real scientific publications about this. We have eyes, and we've been able to observe an increase in the amount of tourism. For example, in our city in Florence, since the end, let's say since we started emerging out of the COVID-19 emergency, there's been a rise in the presence of tourists, and there's all kinds of effects that we've noticed. So, all right, let's think together. And I'd like you for just to write down some thoughts. What are some of the advantages of having a tourism boom? What are some of the things that could be positive about it? For example, is it something that, I don't know, creates jobs? Could it be something that stimulates the economy? Can it be something that brings other cultures in contact with the local culture, especially in places that perhaps tend to be more monocultural? And so there's a greater exchange of humans, of their ideas, of their languages, of their customs. Can you think of any other pros that are connected to tourism? And what are some of the cons of tourism? Some of the cons might be that, yes, it creates jobs and it might drive some competition, but perhaps the quality of the services offered might go down. Or perhaps there is less authenticity in a culture because it gets a bit watered down. Aha, creating Erasmus Plus projects. That is a pro, absolutely. And this idea that in another aspect of the cons might be something that we have definitely experienced in Florence is that there's less housing available to local people in the city center because much of the available housing is now being used for short-term rentals. So tourists can stay in an apartment for a week, for example. And of course, they can make a lot more money. Yes, and Anastasia, she said socialization. Absolutely. In thinking about, I imagine, some of the pros of tourism. Okay. And there can also be, in thinking of the cons, there could be a strain on the infrastructure. When we think about a place like Venice, which has a very delicate infrastructure, and already is subjected to to flooding, and so having a real rise in tourism can also be something that is a little hard on the infrastructure. So there can be lots of good reasons got a lot of good aspects of this and some things that are harmful. So let's think about this. If we were going to write a newspaper article about tourism, and we were coming from the tourism board, and we wanted to promote it, how would we write the headline? What kind of a headline could we write to coming from our thought process and our motivations, that we want to show that this is a positive thing? This is something we can even have our students think about. How would we word it? What words, what verbs, what adjectives would we use? What is it that seems to persuade people? And so understanding each other better. Excellent. And then what about, let's think, if I wanted to write a positive, something positive in a headline, I might say something like, tourism boom, uh, generates jobs and boosts the local economy. Or, Florence is a tourism mecca. Top 10 places to visit in all of Europe. It really sounds like something positive. And instead, if I wanted to write an article from the point of view of someone who is concerned about a housing shortage, because perhaps I work with middle to lower income families who find themselves needing to move further and further outside of the city in order to find affordable housing, while at the same time having to commute into the city center in order to provide those services that could be housekeeping, it could be hospitality, where we need lots of them, but they have a longer and longer commute and a lower quality of life. And so, let's say, live your myth in Greece. I love it. I love it. And how could we say it though, where we were putting a bit more of a negative emphasis on this tourism? Instead of calling it a tourism boom, what might we call it? We could call it a tourist invasion. And that already changes. It has a different color, a different feel. An invasion is always something that's making us, that worries us, that seems like a threat. Or tourism threatens local culture, or tourism overruns infrastructure. So the choice of words, this can be a very fun way for your students to experiment with much more descriptive language. And perhaps they could, in pairs, think about what kind of a direction they want to go in, and where they don't actually explicitly express it to the others, they just write the headline, and perhaps they have a little paragraph, and it becomes a game where the others need to decide, almost like playing 20 questions with who is behind this news item. And so as you get some ideas, I'll be happy to hear them. There are many types of bias. So this is a topic, I only chose a few, but there are many more. And this is something that we can use when we are talking about history, when we are talking about social studies in general and more current events. We can use it in literature, because we can also, when we're analyzing different characters in or different authors or different characters in the kinds of fiction, for example, that we're reading, it can be very interesting for them to think about the different points of view of the different characters. Even doing something like rewriting a paragraph from the point of view of a different character is helping them use some critical thinking skills, a bit of empathy, this idea of perspective taking. And suddenly, this scene is looked at through different eyes. This obviously is something very helpful in geography, when we're thinking about different points of view, when we talk about geography in terms of physical geography, mountains and rivers and plains, or thinking about something more like political geography, thinking about the economics of a region, thinking about the demographics, thinking about culture, language, as connected to geography. And we can also use it in mathematics, in any kind of problem solving. And so the first thing, the type of bias that we might have is, of course, stereotyping. And here we have this great example. We can see the same gentleman he's wearing a lab coat and he's got a stethoscope. And you might have one idea of him with kind of a serious look on his face. And then we have the same gentleman, and he is wearing a t-shirt and he is covered in tattoos. And suddenly his very serious face could be interpreted in another way. So what does the gentleman in the lab coat, what kinds of adjectives would come to your mind to describe him? You can write in the comments what kinds of words come to mind. The stance, the stethoscope, the expression. You might think someone who is quite serious, who is professional, who is someone that is reliable, even. Yes, EU is like a paradise. Yes. And thinking about for the gentleman on the right, who instead he has the same expression, but his body language has changed. And seeing these tattoos and the black t-shirt and the jeans, suddenly we might have a very different idea simply based on what kind of a stereotype we might have in our heads. And it can be lots of fun for the students. Maybe they could even dress up themselves. They could have different, for the younger students, they could have different kinds of outfits that they could put together. And they could do a bit of a role play in front of their classmates, where the classmates have to think about, what is it that this person, how is it that they're striking me? And with the older students, it can be a lot of fun for them to even, find things. They could also do role plays, but they can also look for things online and think about, they could use Photoshop, for example, to change the clothes and change certain aspects of how an image is presented, and have a conversation about the stereotypes. Now, then we'll move on to anchoring bias. So anchoring bias is basically, this is, let me write this in so you can see it better. So anchoring bias is more like, it's, all right, let me put that banner in there. So anchoring bias is, this is why many times products are sold for $19.99. In certain outdoor markets, especially in some places in Southern Europe, or in, for example, I know that it was a bit more of a thing in Italy in the past, maybe not as much anymore, but an anchoring bias is when you go to the leather market, for example, in Florence, and you go up to a seller of that has leather jackets, and you inquire and you say, "How much is this jacket?" And he'll say something like, "Okay, that's 350 euro. It's real leather," and blah blah blah. And the moment you hear 350 euro, you might start kind of wondering, "Oh, no, that's okay." And then they'll come back to you and say, "But for you, okay, come, I can make it 310 because this is the last one and you seem like a nice person," and all of these things. But you have this idea of 350 in your mind, and maybe the real price is actually 280. But the very fact that they set a high price and then brought it down, it does give you this impression that you are being treated in a special way. And so this is a certain kind of a bias that's used a lot in sales. And our students could have a lot of fun looking for examples of that. Then the halo effect. All right, this one is very interesting. The halo effect is whether it's believing something that is stated based on what we feel about the person who said it. So right now, it's very interesting in AI, where there's a lot of, let's say, attributing words to historical figures. And it can be very interesting, like what does it sound like if maybe the same words are coming from, let's say, I don't know, a certain important person in history, or if the same words are attributed to a person in history who is considered a bad actor. And I've seen this in action on social media. You see this a lot, that depending on who is saying something, well, that is going to impact how it's received. And one time there was a friend of mine who is a lovely, lovely person, delightful, has a good sense of humor, and is generally well liked. And she was feeling a bit behind on her Christmas decorating. And so she showed a picture of this really sad Christmas tree that she got off the internet. It was just a really sad tree that was like losing its needles and the tinsel was kind of hanging off of it. And it was on one of those times where lots of people were showing how beautiful their Christmas decorations were. That's a big thing where people want to show off their Christmas tree. And because she was feeling a bit behind, she published this image that she got off the internet of the saddest Christmas tree ever, and said, "I did my tree as well," as in a way that was, clearly trying to be ironic. And she received a lot of very positive comments about it, with people saying it's beautiful and it's so original. And it was a great example, even though it's a small one, of a kind of halo effect. Depending on who says it, whether it's going to be received well or not. And I think that our students could have lots of fun in creating things, for example, with AI, where they would use the image of a person who is going to give a certain speech, and maybe the same speech given by another person, and how it changes our perception. And this would really generate a lot of great conversations. Then we have the recency bias. And this is a recency bias is connected to how we tend to hang on to the last bit of information that we've heard. Meaning, even if the information is partial, is actually misinformation, but sometimes we tend to remember that better. Teachers, this could actually be a kind of a bias that's useful to us, because think about how many times we talk about the more important, like the main idea of a topic in our classroom. And then suddenly we get to the end of the lesson and we're rushing through, and maybe the bell rings and we're saying, okay, everybody, just remember, the assignment, and look on the learning system to see the assignment. And instead, how important would it be to actually plan our lesson critically in such a way that we make sure, using time management, that we still have 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 3 minutes at the end of the lesson to have the students do a kind of, we call it a popcorn, something where they would talk about what struck them about the lesson. What were some of the key words or key concepts? And this is not a quiz. It's not a time to judge them on it. It's a time for them to kind of recall what they are taking with them. And this is actually a way we can stimulate some of their, if you will, some of their recency bias, so that these concepts are the last things that they have in their mind as they're leaving the classroom. And then we have got the outcome bias. And the outcome is, this happens, I'll give an example. When I have a particularly successful course, and the week has just gone really well, you have no idea how many of my participants, as they're leaving on the last day or at some point during the week, if they're really having a great time, say it's 15 of them, which is quite a large group for us. And I guarantee you that they will say, oh, this group, having 15 people is just perfect. It's the perfect number because there was so much variety. There were so many different kinds of activities. I learned so much from so many different people. It was ideal. Then a week later, I'll have a course with 6 people. And if I'm fortunate enough to have a course that goes very well that week, they will say 6 is the perfect number. It's absolutely the best. It was intimate. We were able to really get to know each other. You could give us a lot of your individual attention. And this is kind of like an outcome bias, where based on what the outcome is, we form an opinion. And then there are all types of media bias. Oh, wait, I didn't put this. And media bias. And that is also something that we are constantly battling. I am sure that your students will enjoy being like detectives, okay? Using different aspects of media and trying to understand what is being what is being expressed and why. So we've got positive media bias, right? So where they're kind of what we were talking about with tourism. What are the pros of it? What are the good aspects of it? And perhaps we don't even really get into what some of the negative impact could be. Or we might have that negative bias where we have a clear agenda that we would like to show what's wrong with this without also shedding light on what is working about it. And then we've also got partisan bias, which is connected to what our politics are. So it's going to have a certain slant. And also things connected to demographics. So is it something that is connected to retired people? Is it directed towards young people? Is it directed more towards, for example, a certain religion or a certain race? And this is something that your students they are absolutely submerged in this, and they don't always realize it. So the other thing that happens is that there are different forms of media bias. So there's like a certain frame, the way they're going to frame, right? Or a tone, or the kinds of stories that are selected. Have your students notice that when there is a new, when there's like a new thing in the news, well, have them think about perhaps there was a certain kind of crime in their town. And it will seem like after that, that every newspaper article or everything that's being talked about on Nextdoor or on the different apps that they might use are talking about, oh, and another one of this crime, and another one. Perhaps there is a problem with stray dogs, or perhaps there have been cats who have gone missing, or there are issues with, I don't know, maybe intruders that broke into a house, and it will seem like it's happening all over the place because that is what the media is choosing to put emphasis on. And I thought this was great. Here we have an example of same newspaper, but a different slant. So let's have a look at this and tell me what you think. I mean, here it says, in the Arizona Republic, okay, it says, making their voices heard. Making their voices heard. And then a different, let's say it's the same thing, but it's directed towards a different reader, and it says tensions boil over at rally. So the first one, who might that be? Who might they be talking to? Whose attention are they trying to get? What do you think? Making their voices heard. So we see young people. We can't see very, very clearly, but there are many people making their voices heard. So this is going to be from the standpoint where they're going to be showing support to the people who are there demonstrating. And here, tensions boil over. So here they would like to put more emphasis on perhaps the more aggressive aspect of this rally. So it's not just about making their voices heard, but it's about a certain disorder, public disorder. So it changes how we think about that same rally. Now, we can also do an activity with the students that's connected to like fact versus opinion. And there are lots of questions that we can ask the students where they can try to identify facts. Things like, can this statement be proven or demonstrated to be true? Can this statement be observed in practice or operation? Is it something that you actually see happen? And can this statement be verified by witnesses or documents? So what could be a fact? I don't. I see that we have people that are following us right now who are coming from different countries. Okay, so let's think about something about the city or the town or the country that you're living in that is a fact. If you're coming from Greece, what could we say? If you are coming from Croatia, what could we say? What is a fact about it? That is something that is documented, that can be observed in practice, that we can see it happening. It is proven and demonstrated to be true. In Florence, we may say something like that Florence is a medieval city, a medieval and Renaissance city. Now, we can talk about this because we can point to very clearly the way that the city was developed. We can point to the kind of architecture. We can look directly at the historical documents. But if I were to say something like Florence is, Florence is the most beautiful city in all of Europe, well, I don't really have any facts to back that because other people might prefer an entirely different kind of city. And an opinion is about statements, of course, that express the writer or speaker's feelings and their attitudes or beliefs. So they're neither true nor false. When I say, for example, that Florence is the most beautiful city in Europe, of course, that is an opinion, but for some people, that opinion is true. And something that can really help our students, you can give them a list of the different words that would help identify opinions. So they're like biased words: bad, worst, good, best, worthwhile, or qualifiers. So something like all, always, never, seem, might, probably. Now, these are words that are in very absolute in terms of all, always, never, or seem and might, which is also stating, okay, that it's something that is it's not a fact where we can just use something like it is this. So we have one comment here that says, for example, Larissa is the center of Greece, nearby important place like mountain of God, the gods of Olympus. Perfect. Perfect. This is something that no one can argue with this statement. And you could also have an opinion about it. So this is a great exercise for our students. Let's look at this together. Here, is it fact or opinion? All right. So here it says bored pupils riot as staff walk out. A mob of 300 youngsters ran riot through their school yesterday because they were bored. It happened when teachers at the 100 staff comprehensive refused to do dinner duties and walked out in a union dispute. Interesting. Then we have an article next to it that is about the same incident. And it says disturbance in Devon School. A disturbance involving as many as 300 pupils occurred yesterday in a school in Bideford, Devon. Teaching staff were taking part in a National Union of Teachers pay dispute and were unwilling to do unpaid supervision. The incident took place at lunchtime when, as a result of the dispute, only the headmaster and 2 other staff were on duty. Fantastic. What are the words that we see that can help us? You can have your students highlight the facts in one color and highlight opinion in the other, trying to find what the words are that give a clue. And then they would love to be these kind of word detectives. And this is one of my favorite activities to do in my classroom. It's a 4 C's activity, which is connected to Okay. Wait, let me just go back to this. Let me just go back. This is great. Thank you so much for this. Teachers in Greece aren't young. It's a problem which has to do with boring of teaching. So here we have it. Teachers in Greece aren't young. That is something that is most likely based on a statistical fact. But then he throws in, or she throws in, this other part. It's a problem because the teaching methods are boring. Now, it's possible for some people that these teaching methods are boring, but it's also possible that it is actually quite interesting for other people. And so here we have a great example of opinion. So thank you for that. And now in this activity that I would like to encourage you to do with your students, it's I call it Mad Modern Art. And in Mad Modern Art, the students, you would have them, and this could be used, let me just preface this, it could be used as a kind of a warm up to thinking about critical thinking, about communication and creativity. So remember when we were talking about Bloom's taxonomy and saying that it's not necessary to proceed in a sequential manner. We can start at the top and then work our way down. Well, if down is the right word to use. It's more that all of these different abilities can coexist and can work together, can work separately. So, what I do in this activity is I put participants in my course in pairs, and I usually try to put together people that don't always work together. And then I tell them that they have 5 minutes. You could even give them less if you want. I got this idea from these cards here from the School of Life, and I have adapted it somewhat. And what they do is they have 5 minutes to create a work of art, of modern art, using whatever they can find in the classroom. And I don't even give them time to think. I use a bit of, let's say, I give them some creative restraint, meaning I give them very little time. I give them very little material to work with. And it's thanks to the short amount of time and the absence of like artistic materials that really pushes their creativity. So they have 5 minutes to put something together. Usually they spend, I don't know, 30 seconds looking at each other like, oh my gosh, what should we do? And then suddenly something starts happening. Ding, 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 ding. As they put together their work of modern art, which could literally be a chair turned upside down and a balloon on top of it. Really, it does not need to be anything that has to do with artistic ability. And then I distribute pieces of paper with different words on it. One of them might say lifestyle influencer. Another one might be a kindergarten teacher. Another one might say a populist politician. Another one might say something like an existential philosopher. And what I then ask them to do is to use their communication skills to present their work of art to the rest of the class, to the public, from the point of view of the person that was written on their little slip of paper. They don't tell the others who are listening who they are. The others need to guess by looking at the body language, by listening to the words they use, the emphasis, the kinds of adjectives and nouns and verbs. And it's a lot of fun, and it gets them thinking about how our communication is used to persuade, to either show a negative bias, a positive bias, whether we're trying to use a halo effect, and get them really get them to be thinking more like detectives and be a bit more discerning in the kinds of content that they listen to. So there's all some of the magic questions that we can ask in our classroom when we want to generate a bit more critical thinking. Things like asking them, what makes you say that, when they offer some type of an answer, a thought, an opinion? Or we can also have them expand on their thinking and say, in what sense? Or another question that I like to ask them is, can you tell me more about that? Anything else? And we can encourage our students to give examples, reasons, how they got to certain opinions. And we can ask them whether they view things as right or wrong, or true or false, okay or not okay, because our job is to be curious. And you were asking about where you can find these. I'll tell you at the end where you can find these cards. And our job is not so much to be always correcting them at that moment, is just to be curious about how they got to that conclusion. And we can also, when they have stated an opinion, we can also ask them to now argue the opposite, and where they really have to push their brain to think of it in the opposite way. We can make a game out of it. You could have them even get into groups of 4 where each one has to study, very briefly, they have to think of a certain topic from a different person's point of view, and who's going to have a different agenda. And then they need to argue it from that point of view. And it's something that makes them feel smart and stimulated. They feel like protagonists. More of the magic questions that we can ask are things like, can you say what you mean by a certain word? Like, can you say what you mean by interesting? Can you say what you mean by the word friend? Can you say what you mean by wrong? Have them think about their thinking. Or can you give me an example of that? This is very important because often they're thinking in generalities, but they actually have a specific example in mind. Or can you say what this might depend on? So this is a great thing here that yes, curiosity is an important way. I lost it. Curiosity is an important way for effective teaching. Yes, curiosity is absolutely a driver, especially, like I said, when they are inundated with content and they need a lot of opportunities to do their own thinking. Yes. So I'm glad to see that you also implement these magic questions. I'm very glad to hear that. And I'm happy that you were here with me. Please feel free to sprinkle some of these critical thinking questions in your lessons every day. It's not a special occasion. Make sure that you keep those minds buzzing, and be intentional about it. I think I have found over time that it has made an enormous difference, even in those classrooms where when I first started off in the beginning of the year, there was a lot of silence and a lot of students sitting behind their laptops, and even worse, laptops and, when they were wearing masks during COVID. So it was really hard to realize what was penetrating and what wasn't. But by sprinkling these kinds of questions all the time, they got used to the fact that they were able to express themselves without judgment. Other kinds of questions: what do you think about what was said? How would you agree or disagree? How does this relate to current events? These are all things. How does the author or the writer or the artist think about the world? And I am very happy that you were here with me. Thank you so much. Enjoy the process. Please let us know what your thoughts are. What have you tried? What other examples do you have of things that have worked in your classroom? This is a learning community, and I want these kinds of experiences to be a way for us to expand our knowledge, including my own. So thank you so much for being here. I will see you in 2 weeks, where I will have a great talk with Carmine Rodi, and he is in our Europass teacher network, and he is not only a teacher trainer, but he's also a stand-up comedian. And we're going to have a great talk about using comedy in the classroom. I can't wait. I hope to see you there, because I know this is going to be a lot of fun. Thanks for being here. And if you haven't already done so, give us a like, maybe a little comment, and thank you so much for being here with us. Have a great afternoon.